This is a warning for anybody living in or visiting Fairbanks, Alaska. Avoid the eastern side of Farmers Loop and avoid Sheep Creek Road at night. Roughly 10 years ago, I saw my first monster. I was driving home from the hospital with my mom. We lived in the middle of Farmers Loop. Since the hospital was closer to the eastern side, we took that side home. Almost right after turning onto Farmers Loop, there is a clearing. Some may call it a field due to its size, but it's just a clearing. There is a big metal tower in the middle, surrounded by a forest, in case you want to look for it. I was in the passenger seat, and it was dark that night, so my mom had the brights on in the car. That's when we saw it. We were about to drive away from the clearing as we passed by the forest. At first, we mistook it for a dog, but as it emerged from the ditch and into the light, we were struck with absolute terror. It was a sight that haunts me to this day, a half-naked figure crawling on all fours, its pale skin glowing in the darkness. My mother's screams filled the car as she accelerated, and I, just a mere child at the time, was absolutely overcome with fear as we drove by. This thing lifted its head, and I saw its grotesque face. There were no eyes, just black holes where they should be. There was no mouth, but I could have sworn it was trying to smile. We only talked about it in the car that night, but I can't ever remember her bringing it up again. I have tried to bring it up to her, but she always says that she just doesn't remember. However, there's a look in her eyes, and I can tell that she knows exactly what I'm talking about. She probably knows what it is. That's part of the reason that we tend to avoid Farmers Loop. There is also a feeling that lingers on the eastern side of that road. It's almost like a poison. I have never seen a place transform like that segment of road before. It was filled with happy people who led good lives. Now, it's filled with people who fake happiness, but you can tell something is just off. There's also a homeless camp out there called Dead Man's Cemetery, and you should definitely avoid it. If you go out there late at night, there is a man who stands by the road and just stares you down while wielding a machete. After 10 years of no monsters and almost being convinced that nothing wrong had happened over the last decade, something happened tonight that proved to me that the poison was genuine. I decided to go for a late-night drive to that forest, which took me past the university and down Sheep Creek Road. A big flash of light was past the university, almost like an explosion. I thought of it when the next one came. 2 minutes later, the next flash hit, and my car's tire light came on. It's been having some issues for a while now, so I decided just to turn back, go back to Fairbanks, and grab some air for the tire. I came around a bend looking for a spot to turn around. I saw the reason for the flashes of light. Beyond the hill, I could see lightning, but it didn't seem normal. About 6 of them were coming out of the sky from the exact same spot and then curving towards the ground before going outwards and touching down in random places. I thought it was weird, but I got my tire aired up. After getting air in the tire, I decided I was way too curious to go home and ignore the flash. So, like the idiot I am, I went back. The light flashes were coming every 3 minutes, and more people than I had ever seen were leaving their homes on Sheep Creek. I don't know what was going on. When I went around the bend from earlier, it got dark, and I don't mean middle of the night darkness. It was so dark you couldn't even see the road in front of you with your high beams on. The trees from that lightning bolt, or whatever it was, were burned every time they were touched by it. However, I kept driving. Right before the main train tracks, when I was facing the hills the lightning touched down on, there was another flash, except this one was big enough to light up the sky, and I could almost see everything like it was daytime. The light lasted maybe 10 seconds at most, and I could see what looked like the shape of a person in the lightning. From where I was, I could make out arms, legs, a torso, and a head. But after that, there were no more freaking flashes. I freaked out, and I raced home. So here I am, writing this to you, and trying to warn people. Fairbanks, don't take those roads at night. You may come across a monster with no eyes or the person in the lightning, and I'm pretty sure they are not friendly. This story happened on June 29, 2018, in the northern region of Florida. I was 21 years old, working as a beach photographer that summer with my buddy, who had just graduated from college. We both attended the same college in Pennsylvania. Our company put us in a 4-bedroom townhouse with about 10 other people. It was a Friday, and I had the day off. Everyone else was working that day, so I just sat in the house, relaxing. As the day went on, I became more and more anxious because I had not done anything active. Usually, I walked at least 10 miles a day on the beach taking photos of vacationers, and another day on the beach didn't sound as appealing as taking a break inside with the AC and some quality Netflix. But today I felt I had been too lazy with my time, so I decided to go for a night walk throughout the neighborhood behind our housing development on this nice little nature trail. It's enjoyable to walk there at night because it's always tranquil and there is a lot of lovely foliage, mansions, etc. On this walk, I discovered a bike trail that I did not know existed before and decided to check it out. It goes into the woods, and I thought, why not? Maybe being in the trees will remind me of home in rural Pennsylvania and relax my mind. Little did I know it would be the exact opposite. The bike trail runs perpendicular to the road and goes along a narrow field of power lines that cut through the woods. It goes for what I would guess is about 15 miles at least. I was walking for 20 minutes, and all I could hear was the sound of nature around me. It was very calming, even though the woods always did give me that spooky feeling. It was a nice place to walk, or so I thought. Along my left was the tree line. To my right was the field with the line of telephone poles cutting through the middle of it, and a much less thick tree line on the other side with some swampy marsh areas. It was a full moon that night, so I wasn't in complete darkness and could see pretty much all around me. About 10 to 15 minutes into my walk, some clouds came in and covered the moon. It got much darker out of nowhere, so I turned on the flashlight on my phone. I heard a strange noise coming from my right across the field. It sounded like a boar or a pig. It let out a long, low grunt. It didn't sound like the normal sounds that I was used to. It sounded like something had caused it distress. I stood there listening for another sound, but there were no more. I kept walking, hoping I wouldn't hear it again, as it did come out of nowhere, and it startled me. Instantly, I got the feeling of something not being right. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I was very unnerved. I felt like I was being watched. I tried to find where I was on Google Maps, but it would not load because the service was very weak. I eventually ran into another path that veered off into the woods, and there, luckily, was a map on a board beside it. I stared down the path for a few seconds, contemplating whether to take it. It looked like that cliché shortcut that looked super scary but gets you to your destination a bit quicker. This one was dark, and I mean dark. There was a thick canopy above in this part of the woods, and there was only about a foot between the dense trees and the path on both sides. Without the light of my phone, I would not have been able to see a thing in there. I decided to turn and walk along this path as it was a quicker way home, instead of going back and around the way I had originally come. Then, as I was about to head down the path, I heard footsteps. I stopped and turned my flashlight off to listen. I wanted to make sure I wasn't being paranoid and scaring myself, but I could indeed still hear them. They were coming towards me from the direction I was headed on the main path. I ran over into the trees and hid because I wasn't about to run into some potentially crazy people out here in the woods. As I was hiding in the trees and waiting for them to pass me, I instantly smelled something terrible. I thought maybe I was just so scared that I soiled my pants, but that was not the case. Instead, it smelled like something decomposing, like the smell of a dead deer carcass baking out in the sun. If you've ever been hunting, you definitely know that smell. The footsteps became increasingly closer, then they passed me. I counted 3 people, or should I say silhouettes, and I couldn't make out their faces or even their clothes. They walked in a straight line, their heads staring straight ahead of them, and none of them said a single word. The one in the middle was dragging some sort of bag behind them along the concrete. I waited for about 5 minutes until I could no longer see them, hear them, or smell that smell anymore. I started walking down the dark path, slowly but surely. I tried walking quickly, but I wanted to stay quiet, as I was pretty freaked out. I was wearing flip-flops, and they clicked my heels with every step. So the slower I was, the quieter I was. I walked for about 10 minutes, and I started to hear footsteps again. I stopped and turned off my flashlight. The footsteps were coming from behind me. This time, I ran back into the trees and waited to see if those people were going to come back again. And inevitably, they did. They brought that awful smell back with them and walked past me the same way, dragging the bag behind them. Were these people following me? Why did they happen to turn around and come onto this path as well? I stayed out there in the bushes for about 20 minutes or so, unsure of what to do. I didn't know if I should keep going the way I was going or run back. I hoped they didn't hear me, though. As I waited, they came by again, which is the freaky part. I heard a man's voice say a girl's name this time, though, Barbara and Wilcox, or something like that. I waited another 5 minutes and just started running down the path. I picked up my flip-flops to make sure I didn't make any noise and didn't even turn my flashlight back on. I ran for what honestly seemed like 10 minutes until I eventually had to start to take a breath. I was still in complete darkness, and I turned my flashlight back on to ensure I wasn't being followed. I didn't smell that horrible smell, so I turned the flashlight back off to save my phone's battery and not give myself away. I didn't know how much longer I had to keep going, as this path did not look nearly as long on the map. I began to hear sticks breaking in the woods. They didn't sound like footsteps, but somewhat random. One would break to the left, then to the right. A few minutes later, finally, they started to get louder. And eventually, I bolted again. I ran and I ran and I ran. I was afraid that there would be something chasing me if I ever turned around. The sticks breaking seemed to follow along on both sides, not too far behind me. It was a fight or flight situation, and I fled as fast as I could. After what seemed like running for an hour, I eventually saw lights and came out of the woods next to a sewage plant. I hurried home along the highway. No one was home when I returned to the townhouse, as they had all gone to a beach party. So I sat down, got a glass of water, and searched the name I heard on Google, Barbara and Wilcox. This is where it gets strange. In a nutshell, Barbara and Wilcox and a friend were from Iowa, and they were hiking through Florida in the 1970s. On their trip, they were murdered by a man named Gerard Schaefer. The cherry on top of the cake is that it happened in 1973, and the skeletal remains of the girls were found scattered throughout the area known as Oak Hammock Park in 1977 by a group of fishermen. Why were 3 people, if that's what they were, walking through the woods at night in the pitch black, saying the name of a girl that died 40 years ago about 7 hours away in a different part of Florida altogether? And what the hell were they dragging behind them? I'm not sure if I want to know the answers. Throughout the rest of my summer working in Florida, I continued to do my night walks, but I never went on that bike trail again. So if you're ever alone in the woods, please be careful. You never know who or what you will find, or worse, who might see you. The Canton Massacre stands as a chilling testament to the depths of human cruelty and the horrors of war. In the spring of 1940, amid the dense forest of Canton, a sinister plot unfolded, leaving nearly 22,000 Polish officers and others dead in a brutal, harrowing display of calculated barbarity. As the world was embroiled in the chaos of World War II, Poland found itself torn asunder by the dual onslaught of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed in a shadowy corridor of power in August 1939, stands as a chilling testament to the betrayal and cynicism that lurk within the hearts of men. Crafted in the crucible of geopolitical ambition, this unholy alliance between 2 of the 20th century's most brutal dictators unleashed a tidal wave of devastation and despair upon the world. At its core, the pact was a diabolical agreement between Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union and Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, born not out of friendship or mutual respect but out of a cold, calculated pursuit of power and dominance. Behind closed doors, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop hammered out the details of this absolutely insane bargain that would shape history in not the brightest of ways. Central to the pact was the sinister division of Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, a grotesque carve-up of sovereign nations that condemned millions to a fate worse than death. Poland, already reeling from the onslaught of German aggression, found itself caught in a vice grip of betrayal as both Nazi and Soviet forces descended upon its borders with ruthless efficiency. But the horrors unleashed by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact did not end there. The pact heralded an era of darkness and despair for Eastern European peoples. In the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, the Red Army swept across the land like a relentless tide, crushing all opposition in its path and subjecting the populace to a reign of terror and oppression. The Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, swiftly overpowering its defenses and annexing large swaths of territory. Among those captured were thousands of Polish military officers, policemen, and other members of the intelligentsia, rounded up and transported to various prison camps across Soviet-occupied territories. These men became pawns in a sinister game of political expediency. In the spring of 1940, the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, carried out a meticulously planned operation to eradicate the Polish elite. Under the guise of special procedures, the prisoners were transported to the depths of the Katyn forest. They were subjected to a chillingly efficient execution, bound and blindfolded. The victims were lined up at the edges of mass graves. Their final moments were shrouded in terror and despair. The crack of gunfire echoed through the trees as execution squads carried out their grim task with ruthless precision. One by one, the lifeless bodies of Poland's finest fell into the waiting earth, their hopes and dreams extinguished in a torrent of violence. But unfortunately, the horrors did not end here. In a macabre display of psychological warfare, the Soviet authorities sought to conceal their crimes by attributing the massacre to the Nazis during the Nuremberg trials, which were a series of military tribunals held after World War II to prosecute prominent leaders of Nazi Germany. The Katyn massacre was indeed mentioned. The Soviet Union had accused the Nazis of the massacre, but evidence emerged during the trials that implicated Soviet authorities instead. The Nuremberg trials brought international attention to the atrocities committed by both the Nazis and the Soviets during the war. While the main focus was prosecuting Nazi war criminals, the trials also shed light on other war crimes and human rights violations committed by different parties during the conflict. The revelation about the massacre in Katyn Forest at the trials underscored World War II's complex and often overlooked dynamics, highlighting the brutality and political motivations of multiple actors involved in the conflict. It wasn't until 1990, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the opening of long-sealed archives, that the full extent of the Katyn massacre was finally revealed. The discovery sent shockwaves around the world, laying bare the depths of Soviet depravity and forcing a reckoning with a dark chapter of Poland's history. As the Soviet Union was undergoing significant political upheaval and an untimely collapse, a series of events led to the exposure of previously classified documents relating to the Katyn Forest massacre. These documents provided concrete evidence of Soviet responsibility for the massacre, contradicting decades of Soviet propaganda that had blamed the killings on Nazi Germany. The Katyn massacre files, which included orders from Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and other high-ranking officials to execute thousands of Polish prisoners of war, were leaked from Soviet archives. This revelation was a profound moment, not only for historians, but also for international relations and the memory of those who perished in the massacre. The disclosure of the documents confirmed what many had long suspected but lacked solid evidence to prove, that the Soviet Union, not Germany, had completely murdered all of these Polish officers and intellectuals in 1940. The release of the files marked a significant step toward acknowledging historical truths and confronting the atrocities committed by the Soviet regime during World War II. These documents played a crucial role in shaping historical understanding and prompting officials to apologize and acknowledge what had happened. The Katyn massacre remains a poignant symbol of Soviet brutality and the complex history of World War II in Eastern Europe. Today, the Katyn massacre stands as a solemn reminder of how fragile human civilization can be, especially during the enduring legacies of tyranny. Amidst the tranquil beauty of the Katyn forest, the silent echoes of those lost souls serve as a haunting testament to the horrors of war and the capacity for evil that lurks within all of us.